Red Barrow Crossing buzzed with the fever of gold shouts, mules braying, pans clattering, the whole frontier town trembling with the promise of fortune. Molly Carver kept close to the fence line, steadying her breath as she approached the group of hired men preparing to travel to Gold Creek Basin. She had rehearsed the words in her mind a dozen times. Ask politely. Pay your share. Keep your eyes down. Before she could speak, Bert Hanlon's shadow fell over her. "Well, look at that," he sneered, loud enough for everyone within 20 feet to hear. "Thought the hog pen was that way." He gestured behind her. A burst of laughter followed. Molly swallowed hard. She'd endured insults all her life, but this cut differently sharper, deeper maybe because she had truly believed this journey might change her fate, might prove she was not the burden everyone said she was. Still, she forced her voice steady. "I can pay my way. I won't slow anyone down. You," Bert barked. "You'd sink in the first river crossing." More laughter. Someone mimicked a pig's grunt. Molly felt her ears heat, her throat closing. She looked at the ridgeline beyond the town, the shimmering trail that led to the mountains. She imagined herself walking it alone. Maybe she could. Maybe she couldn't. But she would try. She lifted her chin, meeting Bert's eyes. For the first time that day, the circle of men quieted. For a heartbeat, Molly stood solid, anchored by something stubborn and unbroken inside her. Then a voice from behind cut through the dust and heat deep, calm, unyielding. "Leave her be." And the path of her life shifted. When Molly turned, she saw a man step out from beneath the saloon's awning. Weston Hale, though she didn't know his name yet, moved with the grounded ease of someone who'd lived more years on horseback than on porches. His coat was dusty, his jaw shadowed, his eyes the cool color of river stone. He didn't look at Molly first. He looked at Bert Hanlon long, level, with a silence that carried more weight than any threat. "She said she can pay her way," Weston murmured. "That's all that matters." Bert rolled his shoulders. "We're not dragging dead weight." Weston didn't blink. "Then don't go with us." A few in the crowd snorted. A few backed away. Frontier men recognized quiet danger when they saw it. Weston wasn't boasting. He was promising. Molly felt her breath come back slowly. She didn't know why this stranger intervened, but she wasn't someone who welcomed rescue. She steadied herself. "I don't need him to speak for me," she said softly, but Weston heard. He turned to her then, and for a brief moment, his gaze wasn't judging or pitying, just assessing, seeing her. "I believe you don't," he replied. "But sometimes it helps to have someone shut a fool up." Bert spat near their boots and stalked off, muttering. Silence settled. Molly clutched her canvas bag, wishing her heartbeat wasn't so loud. Weston tipped his hat slightly, not a gesture of ownership, just acknowledgement. "If you're headed for Gold Creek," he said, "my group leaves before sundown. Pay your share. Carry your load. No one will bother you." Molly nodded, unsure whether to thank him or simply walk away. In the end, she managed only, "I won't be a burden." Weston answered with a small, almost imperceptible shrug. "Then you won't." By late afternoon, Molly waited at the edge of town where Weston had said to meet. The sun dipped lower, spreading orange light across the dry earth. 3 men stood beside a mule cart packed with supplies: Lyle Branson, Jonas Pierce, and Ephraim Cook. They eyed Molly with a mixture of curiosity and caution, but not cruelty. Weston arrived leading 2 spare horses. "We travel light," he said. "If you've brought anything you can't carry, leave it." Molly lifted her canvas bag, just clothes, a tin cup, a blanket, a little bread. I brought what I can manage. He nodded once, seemingly satisfied. Their group set off down the narrow trail that wound toward the basin. The first mile was silent except for hooves crunching gravel and the steady creak of the cart. Molly stayed near the back, not wanting to intrude, not wanting whispers behind her back. But none came. Above them, the mountains rose like blue shadows, layered and mysterious. For the first time since morning, Molly felt something warm stir beneath her ribs, something like hope. Lyle glanced back. "You ever traveled far before?" "Far enough," she answered. Ephraim chuckled. "Well, Gold Creek's farther." Molly managed a small smile. Their tone wasn't mocking, just teasing. It felt strange to stand in a group where no one tried to belittle her. As dusk settled, Weston called a halt. "We camp by the foothill. River's ahead tomorrow." Molly rolled out her blanket beside the mule cart. She heard the men talking quietly by the fire, discussing routes, weather, supplies. She didn't join them, afraid of overstepping, but she listened. When Weston finally spoke, it was simple. "She's tougher than Hanlon thinks." Molly looked down at her hands scarred, calloused, and let the warmth of that sentence sink into her bones. The next morning broke cold and pale. Mist clung to the foothills as the group packed their gear. Weston pointed toward the sound of rushing water. The river was swollen from the night rain, and its current flashed with white streaks that promised trouble. Jonas muttered under his breath. "We should have crossed yesterday." Weston shook his head. The light was gone. "We cross now." Molly stood at the bank and studied the path. Large stones created a jagged trail through the water. The drop on the far side looked slick and steep. Ephraim went first. He stepped on a rock, slipped, and nearly toppled into the current. Weston caught his arm and steadied him. Molly adjusted her bag. She knew people expected her to fail here. She felt their eyes on her shoulders. She breathed once and stepped onto the first stone. It wobbled under her weight. The cold water slapped at her boots. Her heartbeat surged, but she kept moving. Halfway across, Jonas lost his footing. Supplies tumbled out of his hands and splashed into the river. Without thinking, Molly plunged forward and grabbed the back of his shirt. The current dragged at both of them. Molly set her feet against a submerged rock and pulled until Jonas found his balance. He stared at her in shock. "You saved me." Molly nodded and said nothing. Her fingers shook from the effort. Her bag swung at her hip. She tightened her grip on the strap, and a single thought flickered through her mind. The canvas was worn at the corners. Her mother had sewn it from an old grain sack before she grew too sick to stand. When the group reached the far bank, Weston glanced at Molly. His voice was quiet. "Good work." For the first time since joining the journey, Molly felt the faint spark of belonging. They reached the tree line by sunset. The sky faded into soft violet, and a thin wind carried the scent of pine needles. Weston chose a small clearing beside a fallen log. The group set down their packs, gathered branches, and built a fire. Sparks flew upward and vanished into the dark. Molly sat a short distance from the others. She was close enough to hear their conversations, yet far enough to avoid interrupting. Lyle joked about Ephraim's near fall. Jonas pretended he did not owe Molly his life, but the way he avoided her eyes told a different story. When Weston finished checking the horses, he sat near the fire. His eyes drifted to Molly. After a moment of hesitation, she stood and moved closer. She lowered herself to the ground across from him. The fire cast warm light on both of them. "You handled the river well," Weston said. Molly shrugged. "I only did what anyone would do." "Not anyone," Weston replied. His tone remained calm. You did not wait. You acted. There is a difference. The words settled into her slowly. She had never heard anyone describe her strength without mockery or surprise. The fire crackled. Molly looked into the flames. I left home because there was nothing left for me. People said I would never amount to anything. They said my only place was behind a kitchen window, watching others live. Weston leaned his elbows on his knees. People are often wrong. Molly lifted her gaze. Were they wrong about you too? He paused. The wind brushed through the clearing. I lost my brother in a mining collapse years ago. I was supposed to be with him that day. I was late. I've carried that weight ever since. Molly felt her chest tighten. Not with pity. With recognition. For the first time, she saw the quiet sadness behind Weston's calm exterior. The group woke to a thin gray sky. A cold breeze swept through the trees and rattled the branches above them. Lyle checked the supplies and groaned. The sack of flour had split during the river crossing. Half the contents had spilled out. What remained looked barely enough for 2 days. Ephraim kicked a stone. We will starve before we reach the basin. Jonas muttered. I knew we should not have brought more mouths to feed. Molly heard the comment, but ignored it. She stepped toward the supplies and studied what was left. 3 small sacks. A little salt. Dried beef that looked more like leather than food. We can stretch this, she said. Lyle frowned. How? Molly knelt and sifted through the flour with her fingers. If we use half portions and add ground pine nuts, we can make flat cakes. They will not taste good, but they will keep us moving. Ephraim looked uncertain. Pine nuts. We should not waste time searching. Molly shook her head. They grow near the base of these trees. I can find them. I can also check for wild berries. Only the safe ones. Jonas crossed his arms. How do you know which are safe? Molly kept her eyes on the forest floor. My mother taught me. Before she got sick, she would take me out every morning. We would gather whatever the town could not afford to buy. She said the woods kept us alive. The group fell silent. Molly stood and brushed her palms on her skirt. Give me 1 hour. Weston nodded. Go with her, he told Jonas and Lyle. Bring back what she finds. They returned with a basket filled with pine nuts and a handful of dark berries. Molly worked the flour into small round cakes and cooked them on a flat stone near the fire. The smell was simple, yet comforting. When the group ate, no one complained. For the first time since leaving town, the men looked at Molly with something close to respect. The trail narrowed as they entered a stony pass. Gray cliffs pressed close on both sides. The air felt still, as if the mountains were holding their breath. Weston slowed his horse and raised a hand. Lyle whispered that the place looked wrong. Jonas nodded, eyes darting at the ridgelines. Molly walked behind the cart and felt the tension rising. The silence became heavy. Even the mule stopped flicking its ears. She sensed something watching them from above. A faint scrape of rock reached her ears. Then the first gunshot cracked the air. Stones splintered near Lyle's boot. Weston pulled his rifle and shouted for cover. Men scrambled behind the cart. Molly dropped to the ground and rolled behind a boulder. She felt her breath tighten, but she forced herself to stay low and look around. Shapes moved along the cliff. Slade Mercer and 3 men fired down from the ridge. Dust rained over them as bullets tore into the rock. Jonas panicked and tried to run, but Molly grabbed his sleeve and dragged him behind another stone. Her arm burned from the strain, but she held him firm. Do not run blind, she said. You will die if you do. Weston returned fire. The echo bounced through the canyon. The outlaws shifted back, Unsure. Slade shouted something and signaled for his men to retreat. Their boots scraped against the stone as they pulled away from the edge. The shooting stopped as quickly as it had started. Only the ringing in Molly's ears remained. Her hands trembled, but she made herself stand. Her legs felt heavy, yet steady. She looked at Weston as he lowered his rifle. "She did not freeze," he said quietly to the others. "Remember that." Molly breathed in the cold mountain air. Her chest still pounded, but she stayed upright until the last echo faded. She was not fragile. Not today. The group moved out of the pass as fast as they could. Weston pushed them toward the trees where the ground widened and offered cover. Molly followed close behind. Her muscles ached from the scramble, but she kept moving. Her pulse remained sharp from the fight, yet her steps never faltered. They reached a patch of pines. Weston dismounted and staggered. Blood darkened the sleeve of his coat. Molly hurried to him. Jonas and Lyle looked stunned, as if they had not noticed the injury until now. "You're hurt," Molly said. Weston tried to wave her off. A scrape. But when he tried to lift his arm, his breath hitched. Molly stepped closer and gripped his wrist. His skin felt cold. She guided him to sit by a fallen log. The others gathered around with uneasy faces. Molly tore a strip from her underskirt and cleaned the wound with water from her canteen. Weston held still, though pain tightened the corners of his eyes. She pressed the cloth against the open skin. Blood welled up through the fibers. Her hand shook for a moment, then steadied. "We need to shelter," she said. "He will not walk far tonight." Weston looked up at her. "You should rest too. You pulled Jonas through half the river yesterday." Molly ignored the comment and checked the depth of the wound. "It is not clean. We need a fire to boil water." Lyle pointed toward a cluster of trees. "There is room for a small camp there." The men set to work. Molly moved with them, gathering dry branches, laying out blankets, and lifting Weston's pack off his horse. Her shoulders protested from strain. Blisters on her palms stung with every pull of wood. Still, she worked without complaint. When Weston tried to rise to help, Molly placed a hand on his chest. "Save your strength. Let the rest of us handle it." Her voice was calm, firm, certain, even hurt. Weston listened. Dusk fell quickly among the pines. The group built a small fire that cast a soft orange glow on the clearing. Molly boiled water in a tin pot while the others watched over the perimeter. Weston sat against the fallen log. His face had grown pale. Sweat gathered along his hairline. When the water bubbled, Molly cleaned his wound again. He tensed at the sting but did not pull away. She worked carefully, her hand steady in the firelight. A thin line of blood trickled down his arm. She wiped it with the corner of her skirt and tied a fresh cloth around his shoulder. "Thank you," Weston said in a low voice. Molly nodded but did not look up. Her mind focused on the slow rise and fall of his chest. She checked the wound a final time. Then she noticed a shallow scrape across her own forearm, left from pulling Jonas during the ambush. Dirt clung to the edges of the cut. Weston saw it. "Let me look at that." "It is nothing," she said. The words came too quickly. "Molly," Weston said. "Sit." She hesitated, then lowered herself beside him. Weston took her arm gently and cleaned the scrape with water from his own cup. His touch was careful, quiet. He wrapped a strip of cloth around her arm. The knot lay soft against her skin. For a moment, neither spoke. The fire snapped and sent a shower of sparks into the dark. Molly stared at the flames. A memory rose without warning. Her mother's voice on a cold morning. the smell of damp earth, the weight of the canvas bag in her small hands, the day she had found a cut on her own wrist after being told she was worthless again and again. She had survived that day. She was surviving this one. Weston watched her silently, not with pity, with recognition. The night settled around them. Heavy, still, almost gentle. They were no longer strangers. The night passed in uneasy silence. Molly woke before the others. A faint rustle in the trees stirred the air. She listened, body still, breath quiet. The sound came again, soft and irregular, not like wind through pine needles. Something heavier. Careful. Searching. She rose to her feet and walked toward the edge of the clearing. Her boots pressed gently into the pine mulch. She crouched behind a fallen branch and scanned the shadows. A glint of metal caught her eye. A rifle barrel. Then the faint outline of Slade Mercer's coat. Her heart jolted once, then steadied. She hurried back to the camp. "They are here," she whispered to Weston. "Slade found us." Weston pushed himself upright. His injury slowed him, but his mind stayed sharp. "Wake the others. Keep low." Molly moved quickly. She shook Lyle and Jonas until they were alert. She pointed to the dense cluster of trees behind them. "We move that way." Slow and quiet. Gunfire shattered the morning stillness. Barks split above Molly's head. Jonas dropped to the ground in panic. Molly grabbed him by the collar and pulled him behind a rock. Her arm burned, but she did not release him. Slade shouted from the trees, ordering his men to circle the clearing. Molly scanned the terrain and spotted a narrow dip in the ground behind the camp, a shallow trench of exposed roots and rock. She tapped Weston's arm. "We can use that. Cover me." Weston nodded and fired toward the trees. Molly sprinted across the clearing. Bullets hit the dirt at her feet. She slid behind the trench and waved the others over. One by one, they crossed. Jonas crawled the last few feet, trembling. Molly stayed until Weston reached the trench. He collapsed beside her, breath heavy. She gripped his hand and squeezed once. "We hold here," she said. And they did. By late morning, the forest grew quiet again. Slade and his men had fallen back into the hills. Weston watched the tree line for several minutes before lowering his rifle. His shoulder throbbed, but his focus remained on the group. "We push to the basin," he said. "Before they return." The trail opened into a valley of tall grass and scattered stones. The sound of a rushing creek drifted in from somewhere ahead. Molly felt her heartbeat shift. This was the place she had dreamed about. The place she had carried in her mind when people called her a burden. They reached the water. It ran clear and fast over smooth stones. Molly knelt at the edge. The cold touched her palms as she dipped the metal pan into the current. She swirled the water. Pebbles shifted. Light caught something near the rim. A sharp flash of yellow. Molly inhaled. She tilted the pan again. A small chunk of gold settled in the corner. Real gold. Heavy. Solid. Warm in the sun. Lyle let out a startled laugh. "She found it." Jonas whispered a curse under his breath. Not anger. Awe. Weston stepped forward. He looked at the gold in Molly's hand, then at her face. Something in his expression softened. He opened his supply pouch and held it out to her. "You found this first," he said. "You keep it. In front of all of us." The men fell silent. Molly looked from Weston to the pan. Her throat tightened. Not because of the gold. Because someone had finally spoken to her as if her worth was unquestionable. She placed the gold in the pouch with careful fingers. Weston closed the flap and nodded. Molly did not smile. Not yet. But the warmth rising in her chest felt like a new beginning. 2 weeks later, the mountains faded behind them. The plains opened into wide stretches of golden grass. The journey back felt different. Slade had not returned. Their supplies held. Weston's wound began to heal. Molly carried her share of the packs without a single complaint. They reached a quiet valley dotted with stands of tall pines. A thin stream wound through the grass. Weston stopped his horse and looked across the open land. "This is where I plan to build," he said. Molly followed his gaze. The land was gentle. The sky felt wider here. A soft breeze moved through the grass in long strokes. Peace lived in this place. They set up a small camp. Over the next days, they worked side by side. They raised walls from pine logs. They patched gaps with mud and straw. Molly carried wood on her shoulders until her muscles burned. Weston hammered beams into place with steady rhythm. Jonas and Lyle helped for a time before heading toward another settlement. One evening, Molly baked small cakes from the last of the flour. The smell drifted through the unfinished cabin. Weston paused his work and leaned against the doorframe. He watched her. Not with surprise. Not with judgment. With quiet admiration. When the cabin stood complete, they sat on the step as the sun dipped behind the hills. Shadows stretched across the grass. The sky turned gold, then deep orange. Molly rested her hands on her knees. Weston looked at the land, then at her. "If you want," he said, "this can be our home." Molly turned to him. Her eyes glimmered, but she did not hide the emotion. "I want it," she said. Weston placed his hand over hers. The world felt still. Steady. Whole. For the first time in her life, Molly Carver did not wonder if she belonged somewhere. She knew she did. Right here. If this story made you feel a little stronger tonight, you're welcome to join us again. Out here, on the frontier of our stories, there's always room for one more lantern in the dark. Thank you for listening.